I'm going to show you how to find where your media budget is creating real customer interest, where it is simply capturing existing demand, and where you may be paying for traffic that is barely human. I'll do it live using 18 months of data from a fictional furniture brand covering 20 million in media spend across 9 tactics and 11 channels. This is not another attribution model pretending it can tell you exactly what every channel costs. It is a practical way to make better budget decisions than relying on platform ROIs and judgment alone. The mechanism is simple. Instead of jumping directly from spend to revenue, we measure the middle of the funnel through product views, add to cart, traffic quality, and the estimated gross profit created by each action. This is particularly powerful for high-ticket B2Cs and B2B brands with long consideration journeys, where incrementality tests and MMM struggle with delay effects, limited signals, and too much noise to guide the decision at campaign level. You will see why Meta can be your biggest driver of traffic, but almost completely absent from your last source attribution, why the cheapest traffic in the account can become the most expensive once you only count for real engagement, and why 2 million sessions may be generating almost no meaningful attention. So let's start with the first problem. Product views, add to cart, and others tell you completely different stories. So here's the demo dashboard. So it's synthetic data, but it's quite inspired by a lot of clients with longer consideration journey and offline sales that I'm usually working with. And one thing that we see very often is this case scenario, is that you have, first of all, you have the offline, which is just appearing in the item purchase because you don't have add to cart or item views offline. And then what you can also see is that you have then like brand search on the top, non-brand search, organic, which contain SEO, and branded SEO and non-branded SEO, and then direct here. And then what you found out in the end is that 2/3 of your sales, especially for longer consideration journey, high ticket B2C or B2B, 2/3 of your sales end up in those categories, which are not like marketing categories. It's just like people coming to your website. And what you do see is that the brand search part, for example, is more visible on the item purchase. And then the higher you go in the funnel, the smaller it is. And you have actually the opposite scenario with social media. Social media tends to drive a lot of traffic, some intent, and then it being very close on the purchase part. But the problem is and this is really showing the power of last touch attribution, because when you use last touch attribution, you say, okay, this is the contribution of social media. And this is a contribution of brand search, but it's completely misleading because actually when you see the number of item views that those campaigns created, you see that brand search didn't contribute very much and social prospecting did contribute a lot. And it's the same also for other channels. Bear in mind, this is synthetic data. So it is inspired from real data, but there's a few things that can look weird, but it's in general, this is more or less the situation that you can see when you have a longer consideration journey. And so the problem is when you use last search attribution, you'll be like optimizing on this one. And instead of optimizing there, which is driving the traffic to your website. And so you have like a bad optimization. And the problem with the solution to that was using multi-touch attribution. So the problem of multi-touch attribution is that it's extremely difficult to get the touch point together. It's extremely difficult to get the user, all of its item views, its add to cart, and its item purchase. And so what ends up happening is that you just have the bottom of the funnel in your multi-touch attribution that you can actually connect to the sales. And so you just end up with like a more complex last touch attribution, but it's still pretty last touch. For example, for one client with a longer consideration journey, I saw that their last touch attribution tool was claiming that 2.5% of the sales came from social media, where in the end, after surveys and incrementally testing, we found out that it was 25%. And this is the exact issues that you have here. In that example, you have 23% of item views led by social prospecting, and then in the sales, you have only 6%. So, and this is why we are using other tools like MMM and incrementality. But MMM and incrementality do come with their own set of problems. And the set of problems that it has is the signal and noise problem, which dies over time. When you have a brand that has a higher ticket, so a longer consideration journey, or that does offline sales, so the person's not going to buy directly, is going to find the time at some point to go to the shop, it just like extend the customer journey. And it's becoming very difficult for MMMs and incrementality tests to capture that. So no, extending the window of incrementality test is not solving that, because at the moment your signal that dies off over time is under your nose. Regardless how much extension you do, it's not helping. And I'm actually going to do a video about this with like a proper demo and show you exactly with the numbers. So going back to the demo, what you see here, we have tactic level, campaign, and traffic quality. That is the first level of data I showed you. So we have the side actions, and the great thing here is that you can split it by group of products, and then we have the spend level here, and then you have the spend by tactic. So the great thing, one problem that a lot of people face is like, hey, okay, but brand search, for example, is targeting multiple products. I don't have campaigns of specific product. That is okay, because what we do is that I'm using the, you have the numbers here, is that I can actually see the percentage of item views that is creating by product, and then redistribute that spend of those campaigns that are not specific to one product. Is it ultra precise? No, it's not, but it's a good ballpark, right? If one of your campaigns is driving way more one product, it's fair to assume that most of your spend goes to that product. Yeah. And so often what you see is that based on the product, you'll see that the behavior of and the contribution of channels are different. So it's quite important to look at it in different groups if you have very different products. And then the value here is we look at the gross profit per view and the gross profit per add to cart. Again, it's not a perfect way of doing it, but it's an additional signal that can be very helpful to understand how things are going. So once you have these site actions in place and the spend and the value, you can then start to dive into the cross-product performance. So the cross-product performance is going to look at the carts and the views and the products. It's going to create an estimated return and then divided by estimated return by the spend. It's going to do an estimated return at cart level and item views level and give you 2 ROI. So the reason why we're not mixing cart and views is because you can't add them up. Because the views can lead to a cart and so on. So the solution that I use is to have 2 different ROI. And the 2 different ROI can be very useful because depending on the initiative you have, you want to use a different one. So for example, if you have a conversion channel, you might want to look more into carts. When you have really like a upper funnel channel, you more want to look into views. This is also one thing, is that you have to be careful that you're comparing apples with apples and not apples and oranges. For example, you can't really compare the ROI of a retargeting campaigns with upper funnel campaigns. So you have to make sure that you compare your upper funnels with upper funnels and your retargeting with your retargeting. Then you have the spend per tactic here, and you have your estimated cart with brand search being much higher than the other one. And that makes sense. Why? Because we're looking at attribution. And so it has like a much higher rate of cart because people come from social media and so on. So this is quite usual to see that kind of thing. So what I do is always I take the brand search and look at the rest. And this is where you can start to see things panning out differently. And so, for example, if you have display prospecting and social prospecting, well, here you can kind of think like, oh, maybe social prospecting is working better than display prospecting. So there's a lot of reason why this could happen, and you have to dive into it. One being the targets, one being the placements. For example, display prospecting. This is one thing that if you use a mid-funnel, it's extremely important that you clean from bot traffic. Display prospecting is very prone to a lot of bot traffic session. Before putting your data into a mid-funnel, you have to clean the data from bot traffic first. But assuming here that all the data is perfect, what you can see here is that social prospecting is driving a better ROI than display. But again, does that mean cutting completely just display prospecting? No, it can be like making sure that the targeting is correct, investing in targeting, investing in the placement, investing in the campaign, and we're going to do that next time, and so on. What we can do too, which is a cool part of it, is that you can also look at marginal ROI. So So you can, for example, you have the estimated return from add to cart and the list of reviews, and you have your marginal curve, which are something that we use a lot in MMM, for example, to understand where to invest more and where to invest less. Again, this is a last touch model in the mid-funnel, so we have to be careful about a few things, but directionally it can really help you to understand where things pans out. So for example, from an add to cart point of view, you can see that the non-brand search has a marginal ROI of 168, and social prospecting has 0.71. This is add to cart view. So is it right to compare social prospecting marginal ROI with the non-brand search? No, not really. But one thing that you could do is compare non-brand search with shopping, for example. That this display, where's shopping? All right, that is a shopping. So the marginal ROI shopping is 279, and here it's the marginal ROI is 168. So there is an argument here to be made that maybe we want to push more into shopping. Again, it's not incremental, but usually when the gap that you see in this chart are wide, they are directionally correct. There's no perfect attribution method. As I always said, all measurement tools have the blind spot. And so this is just an added piece of information that you can use to complete the story of what's going on with your measurement campaigns. And once we've done that at tactic, we can do all categories, but also split it by specific product. Once you've done a tactic level and you have more or less an idea of what's going on at tactic level, you can then dive into the campaign. And here it's interesting because you can actually compare the one that what is comparable. As I said earlier, let's compare apple and with apples. And so you can start to dive into, okay, this campaign, for example, is driving a lot more than this in both cases. So this highly suggests that it might be a better call to invest in this one than this one. And for example, here we have memory foam, here we have velvet sofa. One thing that is very important and that I find all the time, and that it's very interesting, is that it's not because your keyword is just dining table that you should expect only dining table views. What I do see very often is that people come to a certain keyword and they start to get interested by other things and that they look at other products. And often, you can even see transactions from other products than the keyword that the people have used to come in on your website. But again, same as tactic, what you can do is that you can look into first the estimated ROI. So you can see that this one, for example, is continuously lower than the average. This one is continuously higher than the average. So you're like, okay, maybe there's a call to be made that we should move budget from there to there. So here, because it's demo data, it's quite stable. But what you do normally see is that when you do a placement change, a targeting change, or everything, you can actually use this to track the change and the impact. And it's great because when you say, hey, there's a placement issue in display, and then you start to whitelist all the placement, making it clean, or you use stricter on some targeting, you can literally see the impact of the estimated ROI here because you have just more intent in your session. What I was saying is that you can usually start to see changes once you optimize better your campaign. Also, when you have included new creative, a better creative, a worse creative, this is again something you can look at directly. And then you have your marginal curves to be able to understand more or less where you want to invest or divest on both ROI, cart, and views. This is on the marginal ROI of your mid-funnel. Then what you can do too is that you can dive into the traffic quality. So this is really interesting because you're going to see that the number of page visits or time spent on the website is really different by channels. So again, this is demo data where you can see that, for example, display prospecting, here we have an average 4 seconds, 1 page per session. And then when you go lower in the branded search, you have more page, more time, average second, and a high engagement rate, which makes sense because people who are actually Googling your brand name, they're actually really interested by your product. And that can help you to really understand which channels drive the better engagement. And one thing you can do then is that you can actually look at your cost per session and your cost per engaged session. And you can actually start to do metrics like cost per time spent, cost per page visit, and so on. And then you'll start to see that what might look interesting at a session level is actually much less interesting at an engaged session. And this is super important on social media campaign, because I've seen a very famous channel that is actually usually tend to be more expensive in terms of traffic, in terms of session. But when you look at engaged session and the behavior that users have on the website, you can see that it tends to actually drive better quality sessions. And when you look at this, you have another social media at the first look more interesting, efficient. Actually, you see that the quality of the sessions are much lower. So this is really interesting, especially when you have to do some reach and awareness campaigns. Because the problem is, because of the way the algo works, if you bid for example, impressions, the algo will do exactly that. It will try to find you the bigger number of impression for your cost. Problem is that it's going to maximize impression, is going to look at the cheapest impression. The problem with that is that cheapest impressions are often cheap for a reason. And so what you do is that it risks you to invest in the wrong places, because you invest in impression that will never convert, because the impressions are bot traffic, not even human, because in the country you don't sell, etc., etc. And what I do see is that impressions are not equal per channel, and this is one way you can find it out. If of course the user goes on the website, that is one limitation of the mid funnel, is that it looks at behavior on the website. It is not connecting meta impression with a Google search and then look at the Google search behavior. That is another exercise that we do. And here you have the average session per session and the cost per session. But again, as I said, this is demo data, so don't take the information here for granted. And also, like, every brand is different. So if you're interested to look into this and you would like to work with us to have a better understanding of your quality session, what is driving your mid funnel, especially if you have longer consideration journey and you just have struggled with econometrics, reach out.